All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm really excited for this conversation today. We did a version of this last week at the CMO Coffee Talk community. Scott came and joined and talked about his new State of Martech report, which I think is his best yet, not just because it's his latest, but also because of just sort of the insights I think he's giving us as the MarTech world gets more complex, as more and more tools show up, but as AI throws a whole monkey wrench into what we think about how we use those tools and how those operate for us moving forward. So, a little bit of housekeeping before we go. We're going to dig right into it because we got a ton of content we want to get through. Excited for those of you that are joining us here live. If you are here live with us, we'll get to interact with you. Throw stuff into the comments. You can ask a question in the chat, and I'll make sure we get that to Scott. We're gonna have some poll questions coming up in a little bit, so I want to get a sense for how you're thinking about your tech stack. And whether you're here live or whether you're here on demand, we'll make sure you get a copy of this for it to be able to share with your peers. Obviously, we'll give links to Scott's site so you can get links to the new State of Martech report, which is 152 pages long. So you can read that, or you can just sit back and enjoy the next 50 minutes or so. Scott, thanks so much for joining us for this. You're such a generous, open guy, so I just really appreciate you being here.
No, thanks so much for having me. I mean, what a fun time to be in marketing and Martech.
I think so too. Even though I mentioned earlier, I'm one of the olds now, so I've been doing this for a while. And sometimes when you're the olds, like change is hard. Like status quo and change the status quo is not always welcome. But if you take a step back and look at the opportunities that we have and the capabilities we now have and the potential that has, it always has a potential for bad, but I think it has a potential for incredible good. So I'm very thankful to be living and working in this time. Scott, for the maybe 3 out of 1,000 people on this call that have not heard of you yet, can you just do a quick introduction of yourself and your background?
Sure. So I've been in Martech many decades, started as a software engineer, entrepreneur. I built a Martech SaaS company for interactive content. After I sold that, I joined HubSpot about 8 years ago to build their tech partner ecosystem. Left HubSpot last year. And sort of in parallel to that, I've been writing this Chief Martech blog, charting the crazy Martech landscape. I'm sure we'll get a chance to look at that if anyone needs any like additional post-traumatic stress experience with that image. And yeah, just largely an advocate of how technology can change marketing for the better.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fun to watch this evolution and fun to sort of watch you not only chronicle the landscape through your super graphics, but also analyze what it means for marketers. And that was a big part of this last report. I saw you talk less about proliferation of tools and more about some big transformation happening in the way that we're evaluating and using these tools. And so, we had initially planned on just making this just purely fireside chat, but then you just killed it last week in the CMO Coffee Talk group, and you had just a great deck that kind of did a nice job summarizing this. So we're going to start with Scott just walking through some slides to sort of set the table, and then I've got a bunch of follow-up questions. I'm sure you attending live will have questions as well. But Scott, the floor is yours to start, and let's go through it.
Okay, sounds great. Well, I will definitely do this at a relatively fast clip so we can get to the conversation. But I wanted to touch on 4 quick topics. One, just an update on that crazy MarTech landscape. I want to talk a little bit about vibing, vibe coding, vibe marketing, and agents, of course, because why not? And then a little bit about what I would call the word of the year here for MarTech already, context, which if you aren't sick of it yet, you will be. Okay, so short version, I've been in Martech a long time. I love this stuff. This Martech landscape, been doing it for 15 years. Originally just started as a humble attempt to demonstrate to marketing leaders how dependent they were becoming on technology as a part of what they were actually executing and operating. And as a result, maybe they should think a little bit more strategically about that technology and how to manage it. Never in my wildest imagination would have believed it would have had the exponential takeoff it did. It's grown over 100x in the past 15 years. Interesting enough that this year was the first year from 2025 to 2026 that essentially the landscape didn't grow. And it grew by like a couple hundred tools. But after years and years of, in some cases, exponential growth, we may have actually hit peak MarTech. But we'll talk more about that. Zoom in because yeah, that's not really more readable either. All right. One of the things that's fascinating about that landscape is over this past year, there's been a lot of thesis, discussion, narrative, opinion on LinkedIn of, hey, is AI just replacing all of these existing Martech solutions? We do have some data from marketing ops teams that we had surveyed back in the fall, where at least 6 months ago, this was at a place where, yeah, there's some cases where people were using AI to replace certain legacy Martech capabilities. But the vast majority of the use cases were things that were either augmenting on top of those existing platforms or implementing entirely new use cases. And this is, to me, what makes this such a really exciting time, is because it's not just about like, oh, we're going to do this thing a little bit differently than how we did it before. It's just really a period of incredible innovation and invention for marketing and marketing ops. And part of what makes it so exciting right now is, okay, so we've always had that crazy MarTech landscape that I disclaim my graphic there is a terrible representation of the industry, because each one of those micro dots is equally unreadable. If you were going to try and organize the industry in a little bit more of a realistic way, you might organize it by the size of these companies, revenue, market share, adoption. And if you did that, you'd get this what's called a long tail distribution. There's maybe a few dozen companies, mostly public companies at this point in the head, several hundred companies that are really category leaders in MarTech in the torso. And then the vast majority of things on that MarTech landscape are long tail of small companies. Some of them startups, some of them specialists in a particular vertical or particular region. Some of them have built something around some other platform's ecosystem. You even have services companies that have increasingly been building their own apps and software as well, too. But the thing is, for all that crazy explosion over these past 10, 15 years, we're starting to experience a much more significant explosion, which isn't just about these commercial tools, but it's really more and more marketers, more and more companies building their own custom apps and agents and automations, with AI. And if the commercial landscape is the long tail, I've dubbed this this custom Martech expanse, which is millions, billions, depending on how you want to calculate them, the hypertail. And it's really exciting because, from an architecture perspective, we'll talk about it in a bit, there's actually a lot of blending that happens between these. But one of the things that's making this so exciting with this ability to turn marketers into more builders is what we are calling vibe coding, which kind of like a year, 12, 14 months ago, like the term didn't exist. Andrej Karpathy of OpenAI fame originally, I guess just joined Anthropic this week, was the one who came up with this term. It's a little bit of a funky thing, like, there's this new kind of code. I gotta say this the way I imagine it being said, like there's this new kind of coding I call vibe coding. We fully give into the vibes, embrace exponentials, and just forget the code even exists. I'm not going to make any judgment. I just will note that in California, marijuana is legal, so you draw your own conclusions. But a more a more genuine statement, that Andrej made a couple years earlier was that English is the hottest new programming language. And that really has become the case in the way in which we work, not just with Claude Code, but, Claude Cowork, ChatGPT. If you can describe it in words, increasingly the AI can build it for you. Now, I am not in the camp of thinking like this means everybody should build their own marketing automation platform and their own CRM and, I need a DAM. I guess I can just vibe code that this afternoon. For a whole bunch of reasons, not the place to go. But what's really fascinating is there are all these dimensions along which vibe coding, or what we used to call no code, or these sorts of things, really are a tremendous unlock for marketers. And if I look at these different dimensions, it's like, okay, well, when you have an app or an agent or an automation or something that is relatively simple, or if it's something that's only going to be used internally, maybe it's only going to have few users, maybe only yourself personally as an individual, you're trying to optimize your workflow, your delivery. If it's something that's only going to be for a short lifespan, like, oh, I want this app that we can use at this event and then we're going to throw it away. If the risk profile is low, if it's not working with sensitive data, if it's not running into any sort of challenges, from a compliance perspective, there's a whole range of these things that honestly, we just didn't build software for this stuff in the past because it wasn't worth having expensive, high-end engineers spend their time doing all these little simple internal few user short lifespan apps. Possibly the most intriguing thing here is this ability for us to use vibe coding as a way to work through ambiguity. I mean, I started life as a software engineer. The history of the relationship between software developers and business users has always been this challenge of translation. Business users saying like, oh, I want something that does X. Developer interprets that, builds X. Business user sees that's like, all right, well, now I see that I don't want X. I actually want X prime or maybe Y, or could we consider Z? And that iteration goes back and forth until someone sets their hair on fire. But translation is just a genuinely hard thing to do. And this ability for business users to even just use more vibe coding as a prototyping mechanism, to be able to go through that iterative process on their own to really identify, how do I want this to work? All right, not this, let me try this, and then to be in a position to say like, okay, I now know exactly what I need. Can I get some professional engineering help on, how we make this to production? And what gets me so excited about this era that we're entering is it's all these things on the left that have been traditionally underserved by the way in which technology has been available in marketing. It's opening up a tremendous number of new opportunities. And there are just so many benefits to this. I mean, it's not just about vibe coding like building. This is for, being able to do data analysis, different kinds of creative, is we are moving more and more things that used to be controlled, only could be executed by a centralized service team, to moving more and more things that can be self-serviced in a decentralized fashion. And this has a whole bunch of benefits. The obvious ones being, all right, speed. Like, hey, listen, if you can self-service something you want, you don't have to file a ticket and wait in the queue. That also dramatically expands the bandwidth because everyone who has the ability to do the self-servicing of certain tasks and capabilities, like, you just increase the bandwidth of what the company is actually able to do in a given window of time. But the most interesting things to me are the fact that, like, listen, when you start empowering more people, to build and create, you tap into just a much greater diversity of thinking and ideas and possibilities. And this really is, in my opinion, like the opportunity in this age of AI. The reason I'm so bullish, one of the many reasons I'm so bullish on this, is it feels like we're able to tap into people's imagination, many more people's imaginations than ever before. I don't think we've even begun to scratch the surface of what that's going to make possible. But very closely related to that is the fact that to really unleash that, we all have to learn. We have to develop these new skills, these new understandings of how this stuff works. And well, I'm glad you are here listening to me, right? I mean, we don't learn just by listening or reading to things. We learn by getting hands-on and doing things ourselves. And so this ability to widely distribute learning through doing. Anyway, many reasons why I think this is a really great new era we're moving into. Of course, a big part of this is agents everywhere. Since I love putting little logos on a slide, I mean, hey, everybody needs a hobby. In the fall of last year, I tried to take a pass at how do you organize these different kinds of agents that we're talking about in marketing. And at a very high level, I put them into three categories. There are agents agents for marketers, which are really agents we as marketers are able to use backstage, behind the scenes, to accelerate the work we do for creative production, data analysis, audience segmentation, all these wonderful tasks. There's then agents for customers, which are still agents that are controlled by our business, our company, but we're deploying them to actually be customer facing. The ubiquitous customer service chatbots, on websites, are the most obvious example, but things like AI SDRs in B2B or AI shopper concierges on the e-commerce sites, all examples of that. But then the third domain is the most fascinating to me, and this is agents of customers. And the distinction there is agents for customers. Yeah, customers are interacting with it, but we as the business, we kind of control it. Agents of customers these are agents operating on behalf of the customer, the prospect themselves. I mean, again, the obvious examples would be things like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, that customers are taking more and more control out of how they want to like research and discover and evaluate businesses that they work with. And we as marketers, we have almost no control over that, and increasingly like less visibility into that as well too. So just a few quick things on each one of these domains. The agents for marketers, these are things that right now we see commonly in production for content production, audience discovery, segmentation, competitive analysis. If you're in B2B, very likely you're using this for prospect research, and account-based marketing, account-based sales. The thing that's interesting, though, is I gave that stat at the beginning that most of this AI is not replacing the existing Martech stack. It's actually wrapping around on top of it. So this, this is an overly complex version. I was trying to say like, well, let's take a look at all the possible components people think of. Hopefully you don't have all of these things in your tech stack, but at a very, very high level, right? We have a data layer, increasingly where you have like cloud data warehouses or lake houses as a universal substrate, across the company. But our classic systems of record, CRMs, CDPs, CMS, headless CMS, like all of those largely are still in place. Also on the layer above that, a lot of our traditional systems of engagement, the marketing automation or customer engagement platforms, the digital experience platforms, these are very much alive and well. Now, increasingly, they have more and more AI capabilities embedded into them. Aside from the agents, the thing I find most interesting is we're seeing more and more of this sort of AI decisioning logic, or leveraging more LLMs in the way in which we do personalization or more dynamic content creation, starting to like embed throughout that. But then it's around all of these things where the agents are kind of thriving at a layer above that. All right, so I didn't want to go too deep into that, but the thing that this is doing that I find really interesting for the MarTech industry as a whole is that crazy MarTech landscape. The vast majority of the things on that landscape over the years have been applications. I mean, we bought them as applications. They have a certain UI and they have a certain workflow, and that's what we're buying. As we start to shift to this mode where increasingly we're turning to our AI assistants, Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT as frankly more of the interface and more of the way in which we're orchestrating our workflows, these other MarTech systems, they aren't disappearing, but they're sort of shifting from a role of being an application, as we've traditionally thought of it, to frankly being more and more infrastructure. That sort of governance and data and the word of the year we'll talk about in a bit, context, providing the context that then all those more customized agents and apps on top can take advantage of. We definitely don't have time to go through all of this, but I think one thing I would just propose, and I know you in marketing ops know this well, this balance between the deterministic systems of MarTech that we've had for the past decade or two, and what's possible with these much more probabilistic LLM engines. This isn't an entirely black and white choice of one or the other. A lot of it comes down to blending these different capabilities. What's really good to have deterministic structure for? What do we really want to be able to tap into work with more ambiguous or fluid things like unstructured data and streaming data, and how we have more conversational type interactions. This ability to blend the two of these just opens up so much creative possibility. And I just, when I map this out, from like, hey, here's the deterministic on one side and the probabilistic on the other, it's not a maturity model. It's not about like, oh, we win by taking as much of the things from the left and getting, as many of them to be, autonomous, probabilistic agents. No, each one of these is simply a combination that can serve a particular use case the way we think is best. All right, so that's, I mean, again, you could do a whole 3 hours or so just on agents for marketers. Where things start to get interesting is agents for customers, right? We're seeing more and more of this adoption of things that are customer facing. The customer service chatbots on websites, ubiquitous, of course. I think we can all agree we've had them for years. They've largely sucked for years. But over this past year and a half, they've actually gotten quite good, both because these LLMs that are now powering them are very good at conversational interaction, but also we're getting better and smarter about connecting them to the right data sources, knowledge bases, ticket histories, customer records that actually allow them to have intelligent and helpful conversations. One thing I would flag is as we move more and more of this agentic capability to be customer facing, we need to take care about the efficiency 2 by 2 of, is this efficient for the company or is it efficient for the customer to be having this agentic interaction? And obviously what we all aspire to is the upper right corner, like, hey, it should be efficient for the company and efficient for the customer. Wonderful. And there's tons of examples out there in the world still today of things that, no, this isn't really efficient for anyone. The technical UX term for that is, yeah, it sucks. There's interesting things we've always wrestled with in automation, in marketing and customer experience, which is sometimes there are things that are not particularly efficient for the company to do, but the value they can have to the customer, the delight they can deliver, are actually worth it. Maybe not worth it in the short term if you're just measuring the metric on that one specific interaction, but if you're measuring like the lifetime value, the satisfaction, the happiness, the degree to which a customer becomes an advocate for you and attracts more customers, I just always caution companies to not rush to over optimize some of these things in the customer experience that aren't efficient, but they're incredibly powerful for the brand. The one that is the scariest for all of this, though, is that upper left corner of the annoyingly efficient, where we deploy automations and now agents that, like, from a metrics perspective on like internal efficiency are phenomenal, but for the customer, not so much. Like the classic example is always like the phone tree from hell. Press 1 to stick yourself in the eye with a fork. As we have more and more power to automate more and more things with this generation of AI, this is the thing we really need, marketing and marketing operations to be on the, to provide some perspective and governance to make sure that we aren't just over optimizing for internal metrics without making sure that we're really evaluating what is that actual impact on customer experience. All right, the last category here, though, is, well, I think it's summed up best by Tom Fishburne, marketunist, my favorite cartoonist in the world. Step aside, Gary Larson. It's Tom Fishburne. He had this one he did about a year ago. The first half of the slide was these marketers sitting around. Our new marketing AI agent will help us engage customers like never before. And then the other half of the frame, customers sitting around there could be being like, hey, our new customer AI agent will help us ignore marketers like never before. I know, probably too soon for that one. This is actually where things are truly disruptive, because all that stuff for agents for marketers and agents for customers that we control, yeah, there definitely are ways of improving marketing. But these agents of customers, where it's empowering customers with new kinds of superpowers to like rewrite the way in which engagements are actually happening, that's what's really disrupting marketing. And the most obvious example for this right now is, of course, this disruption that happened with classic Google search and the way so many companies have like optimized SEO and paid search media strategies, to now this new world of AEO or GEO, where it is still incredibly important for us to be doing our best to make sure we're showing up in the right places in these AI answer engines. But it is by no means like there is not the same sort of visibility. There is not the same sort of playbook that we've had. But from the customer's perspective, they're friggin' loving this. And you kind of have to admit to yourself, like when you're actually using the AI assistant for this, you're like, yeah, this is a better way to get this information. I didn't actually need to go to that website. Thank you so much. At the moment, marketers, the data on this shows that we do recognize this. We are deploying our content increasingly with an eye towards how is this going to help us show up in AI. Interestingly enough, in the data we had back in the fall, it was still only like 13% of the respondents who said like, oh, and by the way, we're actually, measuring and monitoring that. So, if it matters, you might think about how you're going to instrument that. Luckily, there's a whole category of MarTech vendors that are eager and willing, to help you with that process. MarTech is such an efficient market for coming up to finding any new need and like banging it repeatedly with a whole bunch of logos. But I mean, come on, let's face it. We're willing to do almost anything to make sure that we show up, in the right channel, including this restaurant that is literally 2 blocks away from where my sister-in-law's is in New York City. Thai food near me is all right. And if you're curious as to how I found them, take a wild guess. All right. One last thing here, and then move on to the discussion. 2026 word of the year in MarTech, I'm going to call it, is context. Probably already sick of this word by now. We're hearing it like there's context windows for our AI, there's context engineering for how do we get the right instructions and the data, and the tools to these AI agents and agentic workflows. People talk about context graphs as like, how are we keeping track of the decisions of how we make things so that, AI can do some of that for us. Whew. I think stepping back, and there's a whole chapter in this report on this, I think the way I would think of context is these like 3 overlapping circles. Hey, how can you turn down a Venn diagram for this stuff? The first is like the customer context, which is, what we think of as the context we actually care about, we should care about, their goals, their intent, history, preferences, jobs to be done. There's also the context of the company itself, like our goals, our processes, the capabilities, incentives, priorities, that teams have. In an ideal world, these 2 circles would overlap perfectly. They rarely do. There's always some tension between the overlap of, the customer's context and the company's context. But there's this third dimension that is really even more challenging, which I call systems context, which is the customer has a context. Whether you know about it in your systems or not, that's a separate question. Same thing with the company. You have an operating system of how you actually run. How much of it is captured directly in your systems? That might vary. And so a lot of what we're trying to figure out is this intersection between how do we get greater alignment between customer and company context, but how do we get more of that inside our systems that can actually operationalize on this with AI? And to me, this is the way to think about context engineering. It's about how do we get greater overlap with our systems context representing customer context and company context. My co-author for the report, Franz Riemersma, is a very strong advocate for value engineering, which really almost nothing to do with the tech side of it, of just how do you make sure, that you're increasingly taking the approach of your marketing strategy to actually make sure you're serving the customers that matter, at margins that matter. And so he calls this value engineering. We humbly submit to you that the overlap between where you've got context engineering working and value engineering working, that should be this aspirational golden context, a bit of a nod to the golden record of yore, but much more dynamic, much more sophisticated. So I'm going to close it out by saying there's a lot of work to get from where most companies are here, where the overlap between these Venn diagram circles is often quite minimal. But the flip side of it is just so much opportunity to be able to increase that overlap, get better and better. In the report, there's a deeper dive about pace layering in context, but yeah, you've already indulged me, for 25, 30 minutes here. So Matt, thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you for that. I mean, that was just a great summary of The report, 152 pages in 31 minutes or less, with our housekeeping. So I have some follow-up questions. We're going to get into those. I did want to throw our first poll question up because we had a few that we wanted to tee up here. Clearly, there's a lot of variables now in how we think about our tech stack moving forward. And I want to get a sense, this is just two answers, right? And that's a simple question. If you had to choose, what's the biggest risk to your leverage of Martech moving forward? Is it that you're not adopting AI fast enough? Or is it you're building more complexity than you can manage? You can't say both. You have to pick one that is the biggest challenge for you. Boy, so much to unpack here, Scott. And so while we have people answering that question, context is really important. And that second answer, that I'll be curious, the complexity side. The other word I hear a lot is the need for orchestration, right? And so the more of these tools you build, the more you need better work design and better workflows to make them happen. With AI, like AI is not going to do anything for you unless you actually give it a workflow to follow. And I think AI is exposing the lack of work design and workflow in a lot of organizations that need them. So what are you seeing in terms of translation from tool capacity and capability into actual leverage, and how important is that orchestration layer to make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's arguably all about orchestration because, so many of the use cases we've seen with AI in this, first couple years are largely single player games, right? It's like, oh, yeah, me working with my AI tool, look at the amazing things I can do. When you start looking at like, okay, yeah, that's nice for you as an individual, but as a company and at scale, it's like, how do I align all individuals who, have various capabilities like this? How do I make sure that, there's a consistency and a coherence, not just for our internal operations, but for how we show up to the customer? This is very poorly managed today here. Like right now, AI is far raced ahead of like, well, what's the actual strategy of orchestrating and keeping this coherent? It is also where the greatest battle, I think, lies ahead right now in the MarTech industry from a vendor perspective, because certainly the major MarTech platforms that we all know and love, they have a claim to be the center of gravity, to be those orchestrators, but you have other players come in the market. The AI labs themselves have some visions of how they might make that happen. You've got the data layer companies, the Databricks and Snowflake, folks like that. Even the cloud infrastructure folks are starting, AWS and Microsoft, Google, of course, starting to look at like, well, as we start to raise up here in the stack and how we can orchestrate this. So it is not a solved problem today. And for better and worse, it's going to be a very different set of competitors all trying to vie for you to choose them as the orchestration mechanism.
Well, and if we just layer AI on top of inexistent or incomplete or inadequate workflows, it's just going to exacerbate the problems that we still have. And it's fascinating to me, the more companies I talk to that are like frothy about implementing AI is just a tool and a means unto an end. The problems are as old as time. It's data silos, it's lack of alignment between sales and marketing, it's lead conversion, it's deal velocity. And I just did the last couple of days here at this Demand and Expand conference, seeing so many implementations of AI, but in my mind, 90+% of them are working on peripheral problems, right? Like I think there's three categories of problems we try to solve with technology. It's the things I'm doing now, the things I'm not yet doing, which you could argue if they're not yet doing it, maybe they weren't a big enough priority to begin with. And then the things I'm avoiding. And the things I'm avoiding tend to be the bigger, thornier issues, those age-old problems. Like we've been talking about sales and marketing alignment forever. Why have we not solved that? We've been talking about data silo problems and data integrity and quality forever. Why have we not solved that? And so instead of chasing the new technology, how do we apply this increased capabilities and these increased the breadth of tools to those age-old problems? Simple question for you there, Scott.
Was there a question in there? I was like, yeah, amen.
Solve world hunger, Martech style, basically.
No, I mean, this is, I have a whole list of reasons why I still remain incredibly optimistic that marketing is a career, is not going to go away because of AI. In fact, if anything, I think the scope and potential opportunity in marketing is greater than ever. It's just the skills that we need to focus on, they're changing. And like some of these issues around, like, I mean, you know this better than I do. Like you do this for a living, but like sales and marketing alignment, like this is not an AI issue. This is a human issue,
Right.
But honestly, my perspective is the incentives haven't been enough of us willing to put enough energy into like solving that. And we've had lots of excuses. Honestly, the tech stack has been one of the easiest excuses because you're like, well, yeah, you have your tools, I have my tools, these are siloed. So it's not really our fault that these, things aren't aligned. It's, yeah, we have different tools, so be it. Well, as AI is connecting the dots, across all these things, this sort of layer that spans, those traditional silos, those excuses of saying like, well, it just wasn't possible for us to do it technically, they're kind of melting away. And what's left is like, okay, we're actually going to have to solve this from a human and organizational level. But let's do it because this is the opportunity for competitive advantage.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think the people that are furthest along in implementing, and not just implementing, they're the furthest along at seeing the greatest impact of AI in their businesses have realized the challenge is more cultural than technical. Helping organizations accept a layer of complexity and a layer of, again, orchestration between humans and agents and tools to do this. And I think there's still reticence in some cases for people to do that. Wasn't that long ago we thought, oh, if marketers are going to lose their jobs to AI. I'm convinced you're going to lose your job if you don't adopt AI and leverage this as a core task moving forward. I mean, there's been really a lot of interesting headlines around commencement speakers this year getting booed on stage because they focus so much on AI. And so like it's we talk about it, but I'm like, does this mean the next generation of professionals, the next generation of employees are going to eschew these tools? And what does that mean for their employment potential moving forward? I would think you'd want to embrace advances and not put your hand in the sand around it.
No, I agree. But, it's kind of funny because on one hand, while I would say like, okay, for individuals, the importance of like leaning into the skills that matter, and those very human skills, you can kind of indict the AI labs and a lot of, frankly, executive leadership that they're the ones who largely push this thing of just like adopt AI, try it, like do this, oh, and we can do this and it's going to eliminate all these jobs. And, this narrative was really kind of a chaotic and very negative, narrative. And we're surprised that people are like, oh, yeah, no, that doesn't, thanks, but no, that doesn't really sound very attractive to me. The change management perspective, it starts with the genesis of like, okay, how are we going to frame what this opportunity is? And how do we create a path that actually makes it realistic for people to see, oh, here's how I get there from here. And so anyways, the way we sort of ended up here in this AI mess, just didn't start in the way you should run a change management initiative. But hey, all right, can't go back in the past. Here today, how do we just think more constructively about like, how do you create good change management paths for individuals, for careers, for disciplines, for organizations? And that is not a problem that AI is going to solve. This is us as humans.
Yeah. And when you talk, let's lean into that for a minute. I mean, when you talk to leaders in organizations, whether it's the CMO or the CRO or above, right? Like, what is your advice for managing that cultural change that is going to not get easier, but it's going to get harder?
I think there are two pillars to that. The one which I talked about briefly in the presentation is this moving towards empowering self-service. And empowering self-service does not simply mean saying like, oh, well, here's Claude, good luck. I mean, you really have to be able to like set the environment for it, the governance, like the incentives and the encouragement structure for people to start to experiment and learn. We don't go from, novice to expert overnight. You have to have paths where you can, test and try and stumble. So that's one dimension of it. But the other dimension is, I feel like this was already a problem with Martech and AI has just exacerbated it, which is, I feel like just we're losing the plot too
Yeah.
often. Like
Yeah.
all of this is down in the weeds of like the tech and the engineering and I can, and like we're losing track in more and more organizations of like, okay, who are our best customers? What are they buying from us? Why do they buy that from us? Like how much margin do we make, on those deals? What are the 2 or 3 most important things in how we actually win those business? These are questions that honestly I ask a number of market and they don't know. They're like, wow, that's a good
Yeah.
question. I can tell you about my stack, I can tell you about
Yeah.
our demand funnel and I can do all that. And again, no offense, but because it's not
Yeah.
just the marketers, it's just businesses as a whole. I think have just gotten so distracted with the technical noise around this that they've lost the plot. So what can the board and the C-suite do? Like turn down
Yeah.
the volume on some of the tech noise and like let's make sure we really understand the alignment on the principles of what are we here to do as a business.
It's really hard to turn down that noise. I recently took, the last 6 months of Slack conversations in our CMO Coffee Talk community, and I downloaded it and pulled it in the cloud and said, ignore all AI mentions. What are people talking about related to that? Like, what are the real constraints? And so I mentioned, like, so shout out to the qualified team for letting me sort of sit in their conference room before we're doing an AI working session with CMOs here in a couple hours. And it's not about what can you do with AI. It's not about learn how to use Claude, but it's starting with a very simple question, like what are your biggest constraints in your business right now? What are the biggest bottlenecks? It's not technology. What are the things that are keeping you from delivering more value? Which leads me to our next survey question. So I want to get a sense from you that are attending here today. What's the real bottleneck preventing you from delivering real value? You could almost take preventing your AI efforts from delivering value, but just what are the bottlenecks that are biggest for you? And you can't say all, you can't choose multiple. I want to know the one, because I've got a premise around like what some of the biggest ones are. But like I'm really excited because this will be like the 4th time in the last 3 weeks we've run a session like this. I've done it as a breakout in a couple conferences. I did it as part of the CMO Summit at Demand and Expand a couple days ago. And centering on the problem is really important because it's usually a really big problem that is not something you can vibe code in an afternoon. It's not something you can quickly set up a workflow. Like these are bigger fundamental issues. But if we now have a new set of capabilities, is addressing that as intimidating and as difficult as it used to be? I think the answer is yes. But I think that there are ways to chip away at it. You're not going to solve your data silo problem this afternoon. But are there ways to start to chip away at that problem? Can you make parts of it better? It's kind of like attribution, right? Like attribution is a myth. You're never going to get it. But how do you create more clarity and more consistency in pieces of your go-to-market motion that are moving the ball forward, right? Solving the real business problems, not the technology problems. Curious to see what we get in this poll. So, all right, we've got a number of people answering this question so far. So far, bubbling up, Scott, is unclear strategy or use cases.
I did weigh in on that one, so I may have tipped the scales, but yes.
That's okay. You're allowed to answer too. But I mean, like, it's fascinating that, like, so there's all the things, like, here's the things, but then the biggest answer so far has been, I'm not even sure what we're trying to do here. Which is a big problem in organizations as markets change, as markets get bigger and smaller, as some companies focus on customer success, other companies focus on an exit. And so if you're focused on an exit, obviously your priorities change a little bit as well. Talk a little bit about, I mean, that's just foundational, right? If you don't know what you're working towards, how do we know that any of this is useful?
Yeah. And it's hard because, all these mechanisms that companies have used to get alignment, they tend to be slow. And like, because, it's not like a perfect, the CEO gives the talk, everyone instantly gets it in their brain and everything aligns. And, it goes in fits and starts and there's sort of the cultural and political dimensions, and so as things change, it can take months or years, for companies to swear to get fully aligned on something. But that was never great, but it kind of worked in an environment where that was sort of the pace of change in most industries and markets. And, this mode where we're in now, where the change, certainly in the technology, is happening at an unprecedented rate. but that's also having knock-on effects of like changes happening within markets, and how go-to-market works or doesn't. The change is just it's too fast for like those mechanisms that we've had of how do you actually get a large group of people, aligned and operating on a shared understanding. I don't have an easy fix for it, but I guess my opinion is, putting more calories, into that effort, that communication, that alignment, those mechanisms, which again, this is one of these areas, AI isn't going to do this for you. This is a very human leadership component that's needed.
Yeah, and Lee in the comments just to reinforce, like, it's important that we mention this as a cultural versus a technical challenge. The change management has to be applied. It has to be a priority in organizations. We got a few minutes left with Scott. Just thank you again for your generosity. We'll make sure we get a copy of his deck out to everybody, on-demand version of this, if you want to share this with other people in your organization. A question came in from our attendees today. What's one belief about Martech that leaders should rethink moving forward? What's the status quo or the sacred cow that sort of has always been something we believe in that you think has changed or is less or irrelevant now?
One of the sacred cows that I've wrestled with a number of times over the years is, the drive purely for consolidation. Because as long as there's been that Martech map, the one constant has been just this cry, like, please just help this consolidate. And there's a lot of good for like why it should consolidate more. But I just caution marketers that before you take that to the logical extreme of saying, like, wouldn't it be great if we could just have all of this on one vendor and it'll just be all connected in there and I never have to make another choice on this? It is great, maybe up until you get to the renewal point and you have completely removed all optionality, from your system here. And like, surprisingly, your renewal goes up 10% this year and maybe 20% next year. And why not 50% the year after that? What are you going to do? There's a balance that needs to be struck here between, it's almost like an Occam's razor, is you want to simplify it as much as possible, but not beyond the point at which it is destroying your optionality, your ability to really control your own destiny about the evolution of your Martech stack and your marketing capabilities. And so just, yes, consolidation, other things being equal, good thing. Other things aren't always equal.
Yeah. I mean, efficiency doesn't always mean progress. Some of you have heard my rant about full service agencies. It's a myth. There is no single source that's going to be able to do everything for you. I get why you want to have one that can do everything, but your PR firm should probably not be doing account-based marketing and vice versa, right? So let's just, find the people that can do the best work for you moving forward. By the way, 48 minutes to time to the first reference to Occam's razor. That may be a new record. That's impressive, Scott. I think that's about it for today. We're going to wrap up and let everyone get a couple minutes before they got to get to their next thing. But Scott, thank you so much again for doing this. For anyone that wants to learn more from you or continue to learn from you, where should they go? What should they check out?
Sure. Well, my newsletter.chiefmartec.com and reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks, Scott, again so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending live today. For those of you watching on demand, definitely check out the other resources we have. Have a great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Thank you.